episode, I want to get to what I consider to be perhaps the heart of the matter of pitfalls in Montessori education, or pitfalls in having Montessori education deliver what it promises. We've talked about some things like opportunity cost if you're using materials other than the Montessori materials and the children are spending time with those, then they're not getting the benefit of spending the time using the amazing things that Dr. Montessori designed. But in this segment, I'd like to think about what is it really that Montessori education is and promises. When we look at things like charter Montessori public schools and schools perhaps that were not set up as Montessori schools but have decided to incorporate a few math manipulatives, things like that, where do we call it Montessori? And where do those of us who have decided that Montessori education really has answers for almost every aspect of education and parenting, where do those of us who know this is the way that we believe children can be best served, where do we draw the line at what we call Montessori and what we don't? About 3 years ago in Montessori Life, the magazine of the American Montessori Society, Jerry Abraham has a wonderful article called "How Much Water Can You Add and Still Call It Lemonade?" And that is the question that I would like to raise in this segment. What can we add or take away from the Montessori model and still call it Montessori? Now, you'll hear other little expressions that refer to this problem or this challenge. A lot of times online, you'll see the expression, is it Montessori or Monte-something? And all of these are kind of pointing at the same challenge, the same question, the same set of potential pitfalls. Now, before I go any further in that direction, I do want to say something that won't be a surprise to any of you who have spent some time reading some of the articles on my website. I believe that we as Montessorians are better off looking for points of agreement as we talk with parents and educators that have not yet embraced all of Montessori's wisdom. If someone is drawn to the idea of math manipulatives, I say great. You're welcome to call those Montessori math manipulatives and see how far you can get with them. And then, to my mind, that opens the door for some of us who have experience with the broader benefits to say, you know, one of the reasons those are so amazing is because the children can do so much on their own. They can discover so much on their own, and they're drawn to them. Rather than being compelled to do math, they're attracted to do math. That's part of the magic of the Montessori method. So I am not at all saying that if you're talking to parents that are looking for ways to be better parents, that we should not acknowledge and embrace any aspect of Montessori's wisdom that they want to employ. And the same thing with schools, with one caveat, with one important distinction, is I don't believe they should call themselves Montessori. And I don't even believe they should call themselves Montessori inspired. This is a term that's relatively new to me. I use a term that I call Montessori friendly. Montessori didn't design toys. She found that the children in her classrooms were more attracted to the materials, and so didactic materials are the things that she has left us in her legacy. But she didn't say children should never play with toys, and I don't believe that that would be her intent. I do believe that there is a bit of legitimacy, I'm not sure exactly how much, but at least a little bit, in saying that open-ended toys, blocks, things to build with, things like even the silks that are more associated with some other methods of education, but that the children can use in open-ended ways where they have to add their own creativity to create the play. I think it's appropriate to say those are Montessori-friendly pastimes or Montessori-friendly toys. But if we're going to talk about Montessori education, or we're going to talk about a Montessori school, we need to think about what all needs to be included in that equation. how much water can you add? And how much can you take out and still have it be Montessori? Well, let's go back to those public schools. Now, a lot of our public charter schools are in a position where they are required by law to administer standardized tests. These days, being spring or almost spring of 2015, a lot of those tests are related to a set of academic standards called the Common Core Standards. And it's very common that Montessori schools use all sorts of ways to attempt to teach the Montessori curriculum using the Montessori method and still make sure that they can demonstrate progress on those Common Core standards through the use of standardized tests. Is that Montessori? I would suggest it's not. It's not Montessori at all. Tests, and particularly standardized tests that every child takes at the same time, are quite at odds with the Montessori method. The Montessori method is about children using their own interests, using their intellectual energy to choose a work that they are so attracted to that concentration flows naturally as they do that work. And as they choose those bits of work that they're interested in, their concentration grows. And that concentration is what organizes them internally. And we have research that supports that. We have research in schools that have authentically implemented the Montessori method, and we have research that takes bits and pieces of what we understand of how Montessori works and validates that, yes, that's how people learn. Yes, that's how people keep their energy high and increase and improve and expand their ability to concentrate. So I'm going to say standardized tests are not Montessori. Now, am I saying that I am dismissing or putting down or criticizing the Montessori public schools that use them? No, I'm not. I am very sympathetic to any way that we can expand Montessori education in the United States and throughout the world. But at the same time, we have to look at this with a clear eye. I'm going to give an example of a school that I was associated with for a time, and that school, in the first years of its existence, was not able to have 3- and 4-year-old children in its 3 to 6 classroom. It was a kindergarten. That was the way that the state funding was organized, and they were not able to figure out a way to get those 3-year age span age groups into that classroom. However, that was not where they stopped. They kept working on it until a combination of different ways, having teachers' children, having other workarounds to the funding challenge that they were presented in the first years. They took that as a challenge and they built upon it, and they found a way to create that Montessori authentic mixed age class for the kindergarten. That's fine. That's exactly what I would like to see happen. I don't believe that it's appropriate to say you can't do it right 100% from the beginning. Don't do it. Not okay. I do, however, think it's important that along the way, anyone who is really committed to Montessori education acknowledges the pitfalls of sliding any of those aspects. What about going out? Going out is a way that Montessori explained children who are older, meaning children who are in the elementary age group, ages 6 to 12, take the learning that they've learned in the classroom and then follow their interests into the natural resources out in the community. It's not a field trip. It's not take 30 or 150 children and haul them all off to the zoo together or take them all at once to any one place. Going out is something that the children initiate. It's something that the children plan. It's something that the children follow through with and then come back into the classroom and expand on that. Perhaps they go out into a business arena. They then can come back into the Montessori classroom, use the Montessori math materials to understand the things that they were exposed to about profits and budgets and losses. Perhaps they went to a restaurant and they find out somebody doesn't order these things on the menu. That's a loss. So how does that work? They pick up the Montessori materials and they do some subtraction and they look at what that really means and how they can use those materials to deepen their understanding. These things are Montessori. Now I'm going to suggest that even requiring any specific work of a child within a specific framework may not be Montessori. So how does that work? If you have to meet standards within the public school classroom, if you have to report to the children, if you have to report to the parents who brought their children into that classroom and maybe weren't even looking for Montessori, they were looking at something other. They were in public school, their assigned district or neighborhood school or whatever, and they wanted other. Montessori charter school opens up, sounds good, that's what we want. Having this much understanding of what Montessori education is. And then the teacher is going to say, no, I don't require that they do anything. I invite them through the materials on the shelves, through the presentations, through the great lessons that I do. I invite them to do these different things, but I don't require any of it. How's that going to go over? I said in a previous episode, I don't have all the answers, and I don't think I ever will. I do think one of my strengths is asking the right questions, and I'm going to pose some of those questions in this episode. What if you are in that situation? How do you move that school as far as possible to embrace all of Montessori education and all of the benefits of Montessori education? And if you're in that situation, how do you have to adapt, especially if you have 90%, 95%, 100% of your first, second, and third graders who have never had Montessori before, never had the benefits of the Montessori classroom from ages 3 to 6. That's not the way Montessori was set up. She never said, we don't take children unless they've had time in the Children's House, the 3 to 6 class, but that certainly isn't the way that the program and the method was built. It's not the way things developed, and it's not the way that the elementary curriculum is designed. The elementary Montessori curriculum is designed to sit on the foundation of the literacy that's gained in the Montessori Children's House, the classroom for the 3 to 6-year-olds. What if you don't have that? What do you do? Do you have a transition classroom? One of the things that Montessori has said is, until concentration is established, do whatever you want. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but I can certainly cite where she gives this instruction. What you don't interrupt, what you don't mess with, is those children who have self-chosen work that they are engaged with, that their concentration is fully developed in. That's when Montessori said, leave them be. Everything else is to get them there. So that's what I'm going to invite you to consider. In any Montessori school that you're involved with, in any Montessori school that you go and visit to evaluate whether or not it's what you want for your child, in any Montessori school you're considering opening or working at, taking a position in, how is this approached? If the children have not come up through the Montessori method with those foundations laid, how are you going to support them to work with concentration? Because that's it. That's the heart of the Montessori method. Testing, planned out work, set out lessons that they're compelled to attend, broken up great work periods where they have to go to specials and they have to do this and they have to do that. All of that is counter to the children engaging in self-chosen concentrated work. So if that's the case, what are you going to do? If you believe in Montessori education, if you believe that Montessori schools in their full-blown form are really what supports children, isn't that what you need to work toward? And how do we do that? Well, I'm going to suggest that the first thing you need to do is you need to be asking the right questions. You need to ask about every decision that you make about any place that calls itself a Montessori classroom or a Montessori school. Does this fit with what Dr. Montessori taught? Is it respecting the child in the way that Dr. Montessori told us was essential to keep from crushing their spirit and breaking their personality? we have to look at the hard questions. We have to look at the fact that the Montessori method says there's a whole list of things we cannot do without endangering the psyche of the child. If we want the children to be the promise of tomorrow that Montessori has said they can be, we're going to have to use what she said to create Montessori education.
Hi, I'm Martha, and I'm with Washika Learning Environment. I'm about to show you the biosphere. Close your eyes and imagine yourself in a deep, dark space. This space is empty of air and light, and it goes in all directions forever and ever. Imagine that you are moving through this space, and ahead you see a light. As you get closer, you see that the light is coming from a cluster of millions of stars. The stars are clustered together in the shape of a spiral. This is the Milky Way galaxy. Open your eyes now. There is one particular star in this galaxy, and if you move closer to it, you'll see that it is our sun with planets in orbit around it. This is our solar system. One of those planets is just the right distance away from the sun, so it does not get too hot or too cold to support life. That planet is our Earth. The Earth has water and large areas of land. The biosphere is all life on Earth. Life can be only where there is liquid water. The biosphere has created the oxygen atmosphere with the exchange of gases and continues to maintain it. Within the biosphere are the biomes. Biomes are large areas that have similar climate and plant life. The animals and plants that live there have specific adaptations to that place. Inside the biomes are the ecosystems. The ecosystems are smaller, and they include all the life forms in that space, along with the soil, the air, the water, and the energy from the sun. Within the ecosystem are the different species of plants and animals, along with other living things. Each kind of life form has a population or a certain number of its kind. The population is made of different individuals with characteristics that help them to survive. Those individuals will be the ones who reproduce and carry that trait to the next generation. Within each individual, there are tissues and organs that have different functions within the plant or animal. For example, plants have roots and animals have organs to digest food. Within those organs and tissues are the cells that are the smallest unit of life. The cells can reproduce themselves. And within the cells are the atoms. The 4 different atoms, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, are the ones central to life on Earth. Oh, okay.
I just want to get close.
Are the cosmic nesting boxes. They use a similar format to the biosphere nesting boxes. It's more of a cosmic address. This is the African safari. It's used for dramatic behavior and dramatic play. And it also comes with grammar materials. And then these are our wooden continent animals. They have the control right on the back. Very cool. This is our reading program. It uses the Orton-Gillingham method. And the gold box is for the review. Like a gold star. This is the seasons mat. It's used to celebrate birthdays and show the rotation of the earth during the seasons.
One of the things that's happened in education in the last few years is that we've come somewhat full circle on an aspect of teaching reading called phonics. Most people are pretty familiar with it at this point. The Common Core standards that have become pretty pervasive in the last few years have specific standards that address phonics content and skills. And so once again, it's a pretty respected and expected aspect of reading education. This wasn't the case. I had thought that what I've come to call look-say was a more recent development than what I have found out more recently, which is that sometime in the mid-40s, apparently, something called look-say is what became the more common way of teaching reading. So this was approached with a whole word way of helping children learn to read. Basically, you memorized a few words, you were not taught the letter sound associations, and especially the multiple sounds of the vowels or of vowel combinations, and it didn't work. That is the conclusion that people came to. For some children, it was never a problem. They were so able to intuit the code, those sound letter associations, just from being read to, from learning a few words, and then being able to pick up on the context of the rest, that they were able to learn to read. And I think this was one of the ways that this way of teaching reading persisted as long as it did, because some children were able to succeed with that. We kept using it. Then we evolved into whole language, which was a little bit of that with a little phonics thrown in. And now, as I said, we've come full cycle. So the reason that I am mentioning this is if you're listening to this video, there's a very good chance that you were not taught to read with a solid phonics program. If you weren't taught to read with a solid phonics program, there are a lot of phonics skills, what I would call more advanced phonics skills, that are probably not very familiar to you, or at the very least, they are not second nature to you. And this is one of the problems that we have in the teaching of reading today. If you weren't raised with phonics, then you have to learn it in order to work with your children. And I would suggest that that is a problem that we have, because anytime someone is reading with a child who is a relatively new reader, one of the ways they need to be helping them is by giving them some of those little bits of phonics information when they are not able to sound out a word. So if a child is pretty adept at beginning reading, they've maybe learned all of their basic consonant sounds, they've learned all the short vowel sounds, learned most of the long vowel sounds, and maybe that pretty easy little pattern that if there's an E at the end of the word, then the first vowel says its name. If they've learned those things, then they're reading with an adult, that adult needs to be prepared to say, remember, the E makes the A say A in bake. So it's not back, it's bake. That's the kind of coaching as you're reading with a child that needs to happen. Because that is not happening, some of our children are having more of a problem learning to read, and the time that they're spending with parents that could be helping them move further forward in their reading isn't happening. So the reason that I'm saying this is I believe that every adult that's interacting with children needs to have a basic working understanding of phonics. Whether it's parents, grandparents, teachers, teachers' aides, everybody needs to have that. And the thing is, it's not really that complicated. If you didn't learn to read with phonics, there's definitely some studying and maybe even some cheat sheets or something that you may need to work with, but it certainly is something that people can do. And I would encourage you, no matter what your situation is, if you're watching this, you obviously have some interest in helping children in a parenting setting, in a Montessori school setting, or in some other setting, take the time that you need to get yourself up to speed on phonics. This is something that is essential to many children in learning to read, and for all children, it's going to make things easier for them. I recognized myself when I was in a Biology 101 class that I was pulling back out of my brain some of those phonics patterns to at least be able to wrap my head around words. Now, I may not have been pronouncing them all correctly, but sometimes if you're studying a vocabulary like that, just being able to wrap your head around the word is what you need to do. So I do encourage you, take the time you need to become proficient at phonics, especially if you're going to be working with young readers.